Have you ever felt abandoned, forgotten by the world, alone, not because you chose to be, but because no one ever came looking? That's exactly what this kitten lived through. It was a quiet Sunday morning. The rain had been falling all night. Not a storm, but a steady, cold drizzle that clung to everything. The streets were mostly empty, puddles reflecting the gray sky like broken mirrors. On the side of a narrow alley, tucked between two overflowing trash bins, sat an old cardboard box, soggy, collapsing inward from the weight of the water, useless against the chill. Inside that box was a miracle still breathing, a newborn kitten, no bigger than the palm of a hand, its fur slicked to its body, shivering with every shallow breath. It had no mother, no warmth. Its eyes were sealed shut, and a thin strand of umbilical cord still clung to its belly. It didn't meow, not loudly, just a faint, weak cry that disappeared into the sound of the rain. People passed by. A jogger glanced down, but kept running. A delivery man paused, frowned, then walked away. Time went on. So did the world. But that kitten, helpless, trembling, forgotten, stayed curled in the corner of that collapsing box, waiting for something it didn't even know how to hope for. And then, footsteps, slow, heavy, hesitant. Ethan was walking home from the art supply store, his satchel damp, his umbrella forgotten. He didn't know why he took the longer route that morning. Maybe he needed air. Maybe he just didn't want to be home so soon. But something, some sound, some instinct, made him stop. He turned toward the alley. And that's when he saw it. The box, the stillness, the faint movement. He knelt down, and for a moment, the world stood still. The kitten, so fragile it barely seemed real, raised its head, just enough for their eyes to almost meet. Ethan didn't think. He pulled off his scarf, wrapped the tiny body with trembling hands, and whispered the only thing that came to mind. "It's okay. I've got you now." He didn't know it yet, but in saving that life, he was about to save his own. Ethan wasn't supposed to be out that morning. The rain had started hours earlier, and most people in his quiet suburb were still in bed, wrapped in warmth. But he had run out of paint. And for Ethan, an artist who hadn't touched a canvas in months, but was now trying to begin again, this felt important. So he went. He walked the long way home, past the empty cafe, past the little bookstore that still had its Christmas lights up in March. The street was silent, except for the rain tapping gently against his umbrella and the rustle of the paper bag in his hand, filled with new brushes and a few tubes of oil paint. Ethan was 48. He lived alone in a small second-floor apartment above a flower shop. He didn't mind the quiet, not anymore. It was the only thing that had stayed after everything else faded. After the divorce, after the accident, after the grief. He turned the corner of a narrow alley, lost in thought. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint, so fragile, it might have been mistaken for the wind. If he hadn't stopped walking, he froze. There it was again. A whisper of a sound. A cry, almost too soft to be real. He stepped slowly into the alley, shoes crunching against damp gravel. That's when he saw the box, collapsed and dark, barely visible in the shadows between two dumpsters. At first, he thought someone had just dumped trash in the wrong place. But then, it moved. He dropped the bag of paints, knelt down without thinking. Rain soaked through the knees of his jeans as he reached toward the tiny body shivering inside. His breath caught in his throat. A kitten. So small, it didn't seem possible. Wet, cold, unmoving. except for that faint, flickering breath. Ethan didn't hesitate. He pulled off his scarf and wrapped the kitten with the tenderness of someone who knew what it was like to be left behind. "You're safe now," he whispered. And in that moment, under the gray sky and soft rain, something shifted, not just in the kitten's fate, but in his own. Ethan carried the kitten home like it was made of glass. His scarf was soaked, and his hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of the moment. Inside that small bundle was a life, and a memory he hadn't invited. The stairs to his apartment creaked under his steps. He pushed open the door, gently placed the kitten on a folded towel, and turned on the heater. Then, for a long time, he just stared. He didn't know what to do next. He hadn't cared for anything in years. The apartment was still. No clutter, no sound. Just brushes gathering dust, unfinished canvases leaning against the wall, and the faint echo of the life he once had. He filled a small bowl with warm water, soaked a cloth, and began cleaning the kitten with soft, careful motions. The tiny body flinched at first, but then relaxed into his hand, as if recognizing, even in weakness, the safety it had been longing for. Ethan's throat tightened. It had been 4 years since the accident, since he last held something that fragile. He and Lena had tried for a child, for years, and when the day finally came, the day she called him in tears of joy, it had felt like their world had shifted into color again. But the color didn't last. The accident took her, and the child. Everything after that became gray. Ethan stopped painting, stopped talking. Friends faded. Family gave space he never asked for, and the apartment became a museum of memories no one visited. Until today. The kitten, now cleaned and wrapped in an old dish towel, let out a soft squeak, its first real sound since he'd found it. Ethan blinked. There it was. A heartbeat, a presence, a reason. He sat down beside it on the floor, his back against the wall, knees pulled to his chest. He didn't cry, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel empty. He looked down at the bundle beside him. "Pixel," he whispered, "you're barely bigger than a paint dot." The kitten shifted, nudged his wrist with its damp nose. And just like that, the silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. Over the next few days, everything changed, though nothing looked different to the outside world. Ethan didn't announce anything. He didn't tell friends. He didn't post pictures. But inside his apartment, in the quiet space that had once echoed with nothing but regret, something small had begun to grow. Pixel. The kitten slept most of the time, curled into the soft folds of the old towel Ethan had folded into a makeshift bed. Every few hours, Ethan would warm up milk with a dropper and coax her to drink. She was too small to eat solid food yet, and every sip felt like a victory. Every tiny purr, weak but real, was a sound Ethan didn't know he had missed until now. He found himself moving differently, quieter, more aware. He walked softer, talked more gently. He even started humming again, almost unconsciously, like his soul was remembering how to feel safe. On the third night, while watching her sleep, he whispered, "You're tougher than you look, Pixel." She twitched an ear. He smiled. That smile stayed a little longer the next morning. He cleaned off a small table by the window, one he hadn't used in years, and placed a clean sketch pad and pencil next to it. Not because he planned to draw, not yet, but because it felt right. Pixel deserved to grow up in a home where creativity wasn't buried beneath grief. As Pixel grew stronger, she started exploring. First, she wobbled toward his shoes. then the sofa, then, somehow, the top of the bookshelf. She was fearless, clumsy, loud in all the right ways, and Ethan watched her like he was seeing color for the first time in years. Sometimes she'd fall asleep in his lap, purring like a little engine. Other times she'd bat at his paintbrushes and run off with them like a thief. He let her. In fact, he started keeping his favorites where she couldn't reach, because he planned to use them again. One morning, he woke to find her curled beside his pillow. He didn't remember letting her up, but she was there, warm, tiny, breathing in rhythm with him. He laid there for a long time, hand resting lightly on her back, heart beating quietly in his chest. The apartment no longer felt empty. The world didn't feel gray. It didn't happen all at once. There were still moments when the weight returned, when a certain song would play, or a photograph would fall out of a book. But now, there was something else too. A soft, persistent presence. A reminder that life, even in its smallest forms, has a way of pulling us back. And every time he looked at her, Ethan remembered. He hadn't just saved her, she was saving him too. It was a Friday afternoon when Pixel disappeared. The sky had darkened earlier than usual, thick clouds rolling in over the neighborhood. But Ethan hadn't noticed. He was in the middle of cleaning his old brushes, something he hadn't done in years. When he realized the apartment was too quiet, no gentle purring, no tiny paws darting across the floor, no soft meow from behind a curtain. He called her name once, then again, louder. Nothing. He checked under the couch, the closet, behind the radiator. Her usual hiding spots were empty. The windows were closed, the front door locked. His heart began to race. He rushed out onto the balcony, leaned over the railing, and scanned the alley below. Rain had started to fall, slow, cold, steady. His breath hitched. The window in the bathroom. He had cracked it earlier to let the paint fumes out. It was just wide enough for something small and curious, for Pixel. He bolted back inside, flung the door open, and stared in horror. The screen had been nudged loose, barely noticeable, but enough. She was gone. His legs moved before his thoughts did. He grabbed his coat, left the door wide open, and ran into the rain. His shoes splashed through puddles, his voice echoing through the empty street. Pixel! Pixel! People stared as he passed, but he didn't care. He looked under cars, behind dumpsters, even knocked on doors. Hour after hour passed, and the world grew darker. By nightfall, Ethan was soaked, shaking, and exhausted. He stood at the corner where the alley met the main road, staring into the endless curtain of rain, hope draining with each drop. He whispered her name one last time, nothing but wind. When he returned home, the apartment felt colder than it ever had. He sat on the floor near the window, his clothes dripping, heart pounding with a familiar kind of emptiness, one he thought he'd finally left behind. But this was different. This time he had something to lose, and he wasn't ready. He left the light on that night. He left the door cracked open, and as he sat awake, hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea he couldn't drink, he prayed, not to any god in particular, but to the tiny heartbeat that had brought him back to life. "Please come home," he whispered into the silence. Outside, the rain kept falling. It was just after dawn when Ethan heard it. At first, he thought it was a dream, his tired mind playing tricks. But then it came again, faint, familiar. A soft, broken meow outside the door. His heart stopped. He leapt to his feet, nearly tripping over the blanket he'd passed out on. The mug of cold tea clattered to the floor as he stumbled to the entrance, pulling the door wide open. There, in the pale light of morning, sat a small, soaking wet bundle of fur. Pixel. She looked up at him with bleary eyes, her tail limp, whiskers drooping. She was shivering, her paws muddy, fur clinging to her tiny frame. But she was alive. Pixel, he whispered, voice cracking. She gave a weak meow, and it was all he needed. He dropped to his knees, scooping her into his arms, holding her to his chest as tightly and gently as he could. "You came back," he breathed. She pressed her head against his neck, as if to say, "Of course I did." Ethan carried her inside, wrapped her in a warm towel, and placed her gently on the couch. He dried her carefully, whispering soft reassurances the entire time. Pixel didn't move much, just blinked at him with quiet trust, purring weakly with every breath. He stayed by her side all morning, feeding her warm milk by dropper, checking for cuts, listening to her heartbeat as if it were the only sound in the world. She had scratches on her legs, a bruise near her ribs, but she had made it home. The realization hit him like a wave. She had found her way back, through wind, through darkness, through unfamiliar streets and pouring rain. She had returned to him, and somehow that meant everything. That evening, Ethan sat at his desk, sketchpad open, pencil in hand. For the first time in years, he drew with purpose. Line after line, memory after memory, the image came to life. A tiny kitten, eyes half closed, wrapped in a scarf, held to a man's chest like a secret too precious to lose. Pixel lay on the windowsill beside him, curled in a ball, her soft breath rising and falling in rhythm with the quiet. Ethan looked over at her and smiled. "I think we both found our way back," he whispered. She flicked her tail in reply. Outside, the rain had stopped, and in the golden glow of evening, it felt like something old had ended. So something new could begin. Some stories are too quiet to be noticed, too small, too ordinary, until someone chooses to tell them. Ethan had never been one to share, not his thoughts, not his pain, certainly not his past. But something had shifted since Pixel returned, something deeper than relief. It wasn't just that she had survived the rain or found her way back. It was that she had become a beginning. So he told their story, not with loud words, but with lines and color, on canvas. Over the next few weeks, Ethan painted like he hadn't in years. His small studio transformed into a gallery of quiet moments. Pixel in a towel, her first yawn, the windowsill nap, the bowl of milk she toppled with a single paw. And then, at the center, one painting he poured his soul into, was the moment he found her. The box, the scarf, the trembling life he never expected to care about, and ended up living for. When the shelter down the street hosted their annual adoption fundraiser, Ethan donated his entire collection. He didn't ask for attention. He just left a short note with each piece. "She didn't save the world. She saved mine." The exhibit caught quiet fire. People stood in front of his paintings longer than they realized. Some cried. Some smiled. Some brought their children closer and whispered, "Look, that's love." Pixel came too. She perched in a little carrier, lined with velvet, blinking slowly at the sea of strangers who stopped to greet her like a celebrity. Ethan sat beside her, calm, humbled. When a young woman approached him, eyes wet, voice shaking, and said, "I lost my dad last year. Your story gave me hope." He knew he had done the right thing, because the story was never really his. or pixels. It belonged to anyone who had ever lost something and somehow found their way back to life again. That night, as Ethan turned out the lights and Pixel curled at the foot of the bed, he whispered, "Thank you for coming home." She stretched, flicked her tail, and nestled deeper into the blanket. And if this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more stories like Ethan and Pixels, real reminders that healing often comes in the smallest, softest ways. And share in the comments. What part of this journey spoke to you most? Because sometimes your words might just be the beginning of someone else's healing.